Oh my God, what did I just read? What did I just read? My mom died today, or yesterday maybe. I don't know. I got a telegram from the home. Funeral tomorrow. Faithfully yours. That doesn't mean anything. Maybe it was yesterday. Good grief. What the heck of an opener for a novel. In those few short sentences, we learn so much and so little. First, wherever Maman was, it wasn't a terribly personable nor nurturing environment. You'd think the next of kin would receive a condolence with more information, if not eating precious telegram resources on mere pleasantries. I mean, come on. She just died. What kind of place is this? But that's it. That kicks off the short novel, which aims to tell us that life is absolutely meaningless, at least to its protagonist, and the world is indifferent to your struggles, your hopes, your dreams, and even your sins. Whether you die violently or old in your sleep, the world goes on. This reminds me a lot of the Cure song, Robert Smith, "Disintegration was the best, Robert, the best." Anyways, from Blood Flowers, there's a song on the album titled Where Birds Always Sing, where he sings about how the world is neither just nor unjust, and that we tend to seek deeper meaning in tragedies and triumphs in our lives, but ultimately it's random, and the world is kind of indifferent to it all. This book takes that concept and that reasoning to the nth degree. Albert Camus' writing style is simple, succinct, yet expressive. He reminds me of Hemingway's journalistic writing, but with a deeper expressiveness given the austerity with which he uses his words. Lines like, "It was covered in yellow rocks and the whitest asphodels set against the already hard blue of the sky." Words like that pepper passages that otherwise leave the reader to fill in the blanks of the experiences of this protagonist. For example, when describing the old men who attend his mother's wake, he says, "What struck me most about their faces was that I couldn't see their eyes, just a faint glimmer in the nest of wrinkles." Goodness gravy, that writing, those words, the way he puts it together, the way it paints images in my head. Brilliant, just absolutely brilliant. But we don't get much by way of how the protagonist really feels, how this funeral is affecting him or not. We're left to flesh out those details, though he often leaves us clues. What we do learn is that Mr. Mousseau doesn't mourn his mother's death and is rather indifferent to it. He's more affected by the heat of the day than the tragedies that unfold during that day, as is evidenced in his smoking a cigarette and drinking coffee by her casket. Come on, man. What is wrong with you? Come on. At other times, Camus' simple, efficient use of language tells us quite a bit about the protagonist. This makes the story feel believable. At no time did I feel like I was reading the works of an author. Instead, I was deep in conversation with a guy who was living his life diligently yet utterly dispassionately. A man who explains himself as a matter-of-factly, but never just spoon-feeds us his feelings. I honestly think this guy couldn't do it if he tried. To quote, "I was tired. The caretaker took me to his room and I was able to clean up a little. I had some more coffee and milk, which was very good." Oh man, come on man. Some notable things about this universe. It's Algiers. I assume sometime during the turn of the last century, there was very much a strong French presence here. Though this does not feel like a period piece. The casual references to people as Arabs, and the protagonist's shockingly casual reference to an Arab he had an altercation with. And he brings tremendous harm to this guy, but he casually talks about it, mentioning that he had forgotten that he committed the act. Those things are shocking, and it makes you kind of think, well, this is obviously a book about racism or something to that effect, or this took place during a period of time when that was okay. However, you get a sense this says more about him than it does about the period of time that he was in. At no time during the post-incident interrogation does the protagonist give any real hint that he's all that concerned about the consequences. Being a white Frenchman is the first thing that came to my mind. But again, this has nothing to do with race. This has everything to do with who this character actually is and the way he perceives the world. Even when placed in a cell and having to meet his lawyer, he's questioned about his mother's passing and how others have said that he seemed insensitive. The protagonist is straightforward and blunt with his answers, coming across as not so much unaffected, but unable to speak anything but the blatant truth and resigned to think none of what's happening matters in the end. For example, he explains that he may have seemed insensitive at the funeral because he was tired and sleepy. and wanted to sleep. Come on, man. Come on, give your lawyers something, for crying out loud. Most of us would be whistling Dixie trying to get our lawyers to believe our story and passionately hoping they would help us. But no, not this guy. When asked to express to the court more remorse, Mr. Mousseau says, "But that's not true." Again, it's not so much a slavish devotion to the truth as it is an inability to be anything but himself. And unfortunately, this is a guy who thinks that none of the minutiae of his life really matters, ultimately good or bad. This story is in 3 acts. The first act introduces us to the characters. You learn a lot about the protagonist by what he doesn't say. He does, however, introduce us to the universe building and the supporting characters, some of whom are really, really colorful. The second act, about halfway through the book, is where the story takes a really strange turn and starts to feel less like a modern impressionist painting and more like something that would have more structure and drama to it. It's impossible for me to go further into detail without saying that it takes place in a prison cell, and it also is impossible for me to go any further without letting you know that a lot of it takes place in a courtroom as well. Although this isn't a historical take on the Shawshank Redemption, nor is it merely a courtroom drama, it does make sense of why this book starts off the way that it does. The book's opening becomes much more clear as the book unfolds. What frustrates me so much about Mousseau is that during every step of this process, the outcome could have been more positive had he just made better choices. Had he just cared. Ugh. Yet he approaches every incident, every conversation, indeed every friggin' thought with a casual detachment, if not resignation. It's infuriating to read. I hate protagonists that do this. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. And yet I couldn't put the book down. It's during the trial that you understand none of the supporting characters' eccentricities or traits that were introduced in the first act are by mistake. Some of them are quite integral to how things play out. It's also about 60 to 70% of the way into the story that you come to realize this is an examination of a worldview and a person who is direct, honest, and straightforward, yet such traits can bewilder people. In a world that may seek to punish or ostracize such people, Mr. Mousseau is unable to express himself the way society would expect him to, and thus relies on an eccentric cast of supporting characters to clumsily do it for him. There is a certain comedic and tragic nature to this, adding tension to the courtroom scenes. Again, let me stress, this is not a courtroom drama, though. His personality comes across as a bit detached and even psychopathic to me. His morals aren't that of a terrible person, but he admits in the story that he has never been able to feel remorse, almost as if this feeling is more a luxury than something necessarily anathema to the way he views morality. If he feels morals the same way as I do, I wouldn't know. And he's described by another character in the book as a man who has no soul, and it's easy to see this point of view. I was never able to ascertain what his moral compass actually was. This is made crystal clear during the early conversation he has with Raymond, arguably the most damaged soul, in my opinion, in this entire novel. This is a guy named Raymond. He agrees to write a letter for Raymond that he knows will ultimately hurt one of Raymond's mistresses, knowing full well what is likely to happen. He seems unfazed by what others think or how he should react to moral dilemmas or social norms. During a point where his seemingly callous behavior towards his mother's death is exhaustively rehashed to him. His first thought was how hot the room was. But you discover in the last few pages that this is not a character devoid of emotion. He feels terror, he anticipates things eagerly, and he even seems to feel joy. It's just that the triggers for such emotions isn't always the same ones that I myself would consider. Ultimately, in the end, he realizes the absurdity of hope and comes to the realization that none of it matters. And this catharsis is stressed very clearly in his final declaration. I opened myself up to the gentle indifference of the world, finding it so much like myself. Goodness gravy, the writing is so awesome. It's such a beautifully written book. Again, this is so maddening to me, as I feel you have to care. You have to. But Albert Camus' Mr. Mousseau does not care. His embrace of his fate and rejection of religion, hope, despair, all the passions of the world close out this book so brilliantly. The final chapter stayed with me the entire day after reading it. So the final verdict. On readability, I'm going to give this thing a full moon. It's easy to read. Never once does it kind of lag or anything like that. It's just very well written sentences. Again, there's an austerity to the way he uses his words, but each word actually matters. The pacing, I'm going to give it almost a full moon. The problem is in the first act, the character is such that I can't really relate to the guy because he just kind of reacts to everything, and those characters, my God, get on my nerves. So it just kind of makes me less interested in the first half of the book or the first part of the book, but it does pick up somewhat. My interest is going to be a half moon because of that. My goodness, this protagonist, he does nothing but react to things, and it drives me crazy. Now, the overall grading is going to get almost a full moon, though. And this is because that's kind of the point to the character to begin with. And my prejudices against the character should not weigh against the book itself. This is a succinct, well-written masterpiece. So it's going to get an almost full moon. I highly recommend you read it. Even if you hate characters like that, it's going to make you think.